Greetings. We are Au-dela. We have asked our Dene, who sits before you, to relay a story that may be familiar to some of you in our attempt to ease the apprehension felt by many who have heard tales of abduction and disappearances. Hi, my name is Michael. I am currently 47 years old, and I want to tell you something that happened to me when I was 8 years old. I lived with my parents in a cabin in the North Cascades of Washington State. My father built the cabin before I was born. He told me once how he had hated his job in Seattle and wanted to get out of the city into the natural world. He said they were hippies back in the 60s, and everybody wanted to live off the land. When he bought the property, it was nothing but trees with a creek running through. Sometimes the creek would flood, so Dad had to be careful where he built the cabin and the shed. When he met my mom, they added on to the cabin, and that's where I was born. And a few years later, my little sister, Echo. We had an extensive garden and more than a dozen chickens and 4 milking goats, until one was eaten by a bear. My dog's name was Ritzy, and he followed me everywhere, keeping me safe. My mom was always working, either in the garden or canning or baking or making cheese and yogurt. When I was very young, my parents would drive us into Seattle for the day and take me to the marketplace or the Space Needle and the Science Center, and sometimes the Woodland Park Zoo. After my sister was born, we didn't go into town as often because my mom started getting sick. We found out it was depression, and she said it was too much for her to live in the trees without enough sunshine, and she was tired of always feeling exhausted. When my sister turned 3, my mom left to live in Olympia with my Aunt Dawn. Echo and I stayed with Dad. A year later, we heard she had committed suicide. Without Mom, life was a lot harder, and my dad was always sad. That next summer, I was asleep in my tent out back. During the summer, my dad let me camp out with my dog, Ritzy. That night, I woke up because Ritzy was barking like crazy, and I could see light coming in through the canvas of the tent. I unzipped the flap and went outside to see the whole house was in flames. The fire had already burned through the shed and was spreading out closer to me. I sort of ran around in circles, not knowing what I should do. I tried getting closer to the house, but the flames wouldn't let me get near. I knew deep down that my sister and Dad were gone. Everything was gone. The only thing left to do was to run. Ritzy ran behind me. I remembered how Dad had told me when the wildfires broke out, that I should always go to the creek. We kept running with the fire chasing us. When we got to the creek, we found an overhang along the bank where the water had washed away the sandy cliff and made sort of a cave. I remembered this is where I caught that big trout. Ritzy and I burrowed back into the cave and stayed there until the fire passed. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up when Ritzy started barking. It was still somewhat dark, but I could see a light just over the ridge. I climbed out of the cave and looked around, and everything was smoky like a thick fog. Ritzy and I started walking toward the light, which was still below the ridge of the hill. Just as we got close, the light began to rise up, and I stumbled backwards. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Ritzy stopped dead, frozen in his tracks. I stood back up, and all I could do was stare at this thing in front of me. I had never seen anything like it, except in movies. The thing was triangular and big, about the size of a standard baseball field. Completely silent. It just hung there, with only the lights moving. Then a bright beam of light shot out toward me from under the ship. I tried to scream, but no sound came, like in a nightmare, and I couldn't move. When the beam hit me, it felt alive, like it was breathing, pulsing around my chest. I was so scared. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could to make it go away. In a moment, I felt my feet hit something solid, like a floor or something. And when the light left my chest, it felt as if someone had been carrying me and set me down. I was afraid to open my eyes. And when I did, I saw 3 figures standing in front of me. At first I couldn't tell what they were, but when my eyes focused, I could see they were not totally human. They were slightly taller than I was at the time, and 2 of them were bald, but the one standing in the center had pure white hair and was a little smaller. Their skin was very pale with large eyes. I just stood there staring, and soon I wondered if maybe they were waiting to see how I would react. So I tried lifting my hand, and when I did, they each did the same thing, like they were copying me exactly. It was so still, I could hear my heart pounding loudly, and my breaths were coming in gasps. Then the middle figure stepped forward and held its hand out toward me, as if offering to shake my hand. So I offered mine. When the hand touched mine, it felt cool and soft, like a doll. And I thought maybe I shouldn't squeeze too hard. The figure then tilted its head to the side, and I could hear it speaking to me without opening its mouth. It told me to follow. All three figures slowly turned their backs to me and started walking away. I looked around for Ritzy, and the voice told me he was fine and I should follow. They led me into an all-white room with a bed and a sink and a shower and toilet sitting back in a little open closet. They told me there was water and I should drink some out of one of the cups and go to bed and sleep, and they would wake me in the morning. When I laid down, I was instantly asleep. The next thing I knew, I was awakened by a voice I couldn't see and told to shower and put on the robe they had laid out for me. I did as I was told. After the shower, I sat down on the side of the bed and waited. In a couple of minutes, a girl walked into the room, a human girl. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and soft white skin and huge blue eyes. She told me her name was Kielo, which means lily of the valley. Kielo asked me to follow her and said she would take me to a place where we could eat breakfast, and she would explain where we are and what's going on. I was so glad to see Kielo. She was very friendly, and being with her made me feel safe. We ate breakfast alone. It was a platter holding a fruit and bread like I'd never seen or tasted before, and a hot drink that reminded me a little of the hot chocolate my mom used to make. Thinking about my mom made me feel scared and sad. I missed my family so much. When I turned around, I saw Ritzy running toward me with his tail wagging. I jumped up from the table and ran to my dog. Oh, Ritzy, Ritzy. Kielo smiled and kneeled down to pet him. She told me she had a cat named Petal because he would always try to eat the rose petals off the rose bush in her backyard. I picked up Ritzy and set him on my lap. Kielo asked me if I was feeling better. I told her I was, and she said when we finished eating, she would show me around. We walked through the ship, which seemed much more spacious from the inside than it seemed from the outside. I was surprised how empty it was for so much space. Kielo led me to a long couch and said if I wanted to sit for a while, she would tell me more about where we are. I sat beside her and listened. I was born in Sweden, But a few years ago, my father was sent to Amsterdam just before the coronation riots broke out. We were living in an apartment very near where the violence first erupted. The closer the crowds came to our flat, my father decided we should get in the car and drive out of town to stay with my uncle in the countryside. As we were backing out of the driveway, a police van swerved sideways into the driver's side of our car, and my father was instantly killed. I wasn't hurt, but a bystander pulled me out and set me on the sidewalk. I was terrified of the violence and all the people throwing stones and bricks. When I saw a man tossing a fiery bottle into the police van, it exploded, and I jumped up and just started running. I ran and ran until I couldn't run anymore. I had no idea where I was. There were only a couple of houses around, mostly empty fields. I found a tree next to a fence and sat and leaned against it until I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was here and have been ever since. The ship we are on means wanderer in English. The beings aboard come from a planet called Sassani, near the Orion constellation. They are very loving and peaceful. When they brought me to the ship, they explained that I was one of their hybrid children and that they have watched over me since before my birth. When they saw that my father was killed and I was alone and in danger, they picked me up to keep me safe. It's exactly the same with you. You also are what they refer to as a hybrid child. And they have been monitoring you since you were first placed into your mother's womb. They want you to know that you have a choice. If you prefer, they will return you to Earth. But if you stay with us, they will protect you and take care of you until you're able to adapt to the diet and richer oxygen levels. Then we can both choose to move onto one of their city ships to live for as long as we choose. Many of their ships are as large or larger than cities and are beautiful with park-like areas and flower-lined streets and filled with joyous and peaceful beings. And some are children like us. After Kielo told me her story, she took me to meet the others. They were so friendly and kind and made me laugh. And all of my fears soon disappeared. I remained aboard that and other Sassani ships for the next 2 years and have since chosen to stay with these kind beings who are now my family. The more I learn from them, the more I love them. I just want everyone to know that there are so many other civilizations like these and wonderful people who live in the stars above Earth. I remember laying in the grass with my dad and sister and gazing up into the night sky, wondering if anyone was out there looking back. Now Kielo and I are looking back at you and sending our greetings. Shivai, I love you.